Welcome back, friends, to Terraverse TV. John Altarelli again, your host. I've got Jenna back there, our producer, taking care of all the technical aspects and putting up clips and videos. If you like the content, before we get started, today is another episode in our sort of constitutional law series where I'm giving sort of pretty high level, not academic level analysis, because I think the average person doesn't want to spend the amount of time that it takes to go through each of these, the years of study that it takes to become a constitutional scholar. So I'm not going to try to give you that level, not even a law school level analysis, because that would take years. But to give you just sort of what I think the average citizen in the United States should know about our Constitution, and particularly right now we're covering the Bill of Rights, or the amendments to the Constitution. So today we're on the Third Amendment. I did the first and second already. We're going to go through them all. I might combine some of them where they're relevant to combine, like the Fourth and Fifth, I think probably are good to do together. But the Third Amendment that we're going to do today is probably going to be the shortest clip, because it's probably the least relevant of the amendments today. It was very relevant at the time, but so today it's not that relevant. So before I get started with the content, I just want to tell you, if you like the content here, if you like what we're doing here on Terraverse TV, please subscribe, like, share it with other people, provide your comments. Please be civil. I think it's important that if we have discussions, you don't have to agree with me. You may think I'm doing a horrible job. That's fine, but I'm trying. And the more that you help me and provide additional color and comments, I'll take them and I'll try to incorporate them in further episodes. So I will take the comments that are helpful, that are here to help other people understand the Constitution, understand our rights, why America is so great, and why we need to pay attention to these things and not forget them just because it's a couple hundred years old. These are the things that kept us together for this long. It's what made us a great country, and they're very, very important, and particularly the Bill of Rights, which are going through the first 10 amendments, which are mostly based around individual rights. These are what every person in America, they're sort of inalienable rights. They're very, very important. And even though from time to time our government and our legislatures and even our law enforcement people sort of forget these rights and they sort of, abridge them, I think part of the reason is because people have forgotten they actually have these rights, and they've sort of given them up almost voluntarily, or don't expect them to be honored. And I think it's important that people know these rights and they continue to be diligent about enforcing them. So let's get started on this. So we're going to do the Third Amendment. Jen's going to put up the text of it. I'm going to just read it real quickly. So, no soldier in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Now, I suspect, we could pass a law that says that during war we might second troops or somebody in someone's houses. I don't think it's ever been done. As a matter of fact, I'm positive it's never been done after we succeeded from Britain. And where this came from, this is all part of the Revolutionary War. What happened is in 1765, the British had this thing called the Quartering Act. And this allowed the British to put soldiers in public buildings and barracks and inns. Public accommodations could be taken over by soldiers in the colonies if they decided they needed them. That was a real problem. And then it got worse in 1774, sort of on the run-up to the actual Revolutionary War. They expanded that to even include private homes. So they could put soldiers in private homes without the consent of the owner. That really started to tick off the colonists. And then in Boston, they actually did it during the early days, and that became a real problem. And that's when we had our first Declaration of Independence. When we had the Declaration of Independence, one of the most important things that they were complaining about, one of the reasons for all this succession, was the fact that King George had decided that he was going to take over people's homes for use by the military, and that was very offensive because that's sort of part of what we think of America is our most sanctuary, is our home, right? It's the most important thing for us to protect, and this sort of all goes back to, frankly, what happened when they were able to quarter soldiers in the colonists' homes. So, and by the way, during the Revolutionary War, when the when the Continental Army actually needed places to feed, house, and quarter the soldiers for our troops, we did not impose upon the civilians or private citizens to do so. I suspect, and I don't have any data on this, but it wouldn't be surprising that maybe people did volunteer, people who had big houses or whatever, and did help, but it was on a voluntary basis. They were not forced to do so. And that just goes to show how big of an issue this was, that even when we needed it to fight the war, we didn't do the same thing that Britain did to us, because people really took offense to that. Now, it didn't get into the original Constitution. As we talked about, none of the first 10 amendments were. They were all came in after, because there was a big battle between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists over what should be enshrined in the Constitution. And the Anti-Federalists were absolutely adamant that these individual rights needed to be enumerated. The Federalists thought that they were kind of covered by the way the separation of powers was there. They felt that it was not necessary, and maybe they didn't actually want some of them, but I think it's really more that was not necessary. If you go back and look at some of the writings, I don't think it was, one side says we're not going to give you individual rights, the other side said we need them. I think the Federalists thought that they were there by implication, and I think the Anti-Federalists said, no, not good enough. We want them in there. We want them written. And I got to tell you, I'm glad that the Anti-Federalists sort of won out over time, even though it took a bit, a decade or so to get these first 10 amendments in. I'm glad they did, because even with those amendments, we have so many battles today still around the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment. Can you imagine how bad it would be if we didn't have these enshrined in the Constitution, in these amendments? It's so easy for people to forget how governments continue to grow, continue to take away your rights, continue to infringe on your freedoms. And even in a democratic, actually we're a constitutional republic, but people think of it as a democracy. They think of, the ability of the majority to sort of impose their will on the minority and on individual rights. That's a problem, and that's what the framers of the Constitution, and particularly the Anti-Federalists, were very concerned with, that they needed this protection against the government and protection against each other. And they were right. And if you look at what's going on in today's world, you'll see that more and more these fundamental rights that are in the Constitution are being eaten away little by little, and it's being done by people pushing the government. Some of it's by the government, but a lot of it's just by people forgetting that these are our inalienable rights, and they are human rights, and we should remember them, and we should protect them diligently, even when we don't agree with someone else is doing. As long as it's a protected right, they ought to be able to continue to do it. So let's get a little deeper now. So it didn't get into the Constitution, but it got in later. It hasn't been one of those amendments that has gotten a lot of play since then. They didn't try to do it during the Civil War even. There was a lot of concern that it might happen where we might want to put troops in during the Civil War, but it didn't happen. So it was one of those things that got done, and it did survive. It didn't get overruled even during the Civil War. And I think there's probably one case, I think it was Engblom versus Carey, 1982, where in New York, they put some correction officers who were on strike. They came in, they had the National Guards come in to take over those jobs, and they basically put those National Guard troops in the barracks where the correction officers were supposed to stay. And they had a case on that, and the case came out where they said, look, even those barracks are protected. So it's not just your home. It's like, we're going to extend this to even cover that. So even in that case, it's going to be very difficult for the federal government to come in and put troops or agents or anything in someone else's home, someone else's barracks, or anything like that. So I think it's a good thing, and so far that's probably like the only battle we've had. However, what's the significance of the Third Amendment going forward? Well, I think the most important thing about the Third Amendment going forward is it falls into the basket of rights that protects your property, sort of property rights, the home being one of the most important property rights we have. and search and seizure. All of these things about your home. Can't have your home taken for public use without being compensated. We have a lot of laws around protecting your home, and property right laws, or excuse me, real property laws are very, very old, very, very codified. There's a lot of laws to protect your ability to own property, to do what you will with your property. There are, of course, zoning rules and all this to sort of affect some of it. But for the most part, your property is pretty much yours, and you have the right to protect it, defend yourself against intruders and trespassers, and to use the property for any lawful means. So that's, and the Third Amendment has been cited, in sort of cases like that where property rights were being under attack. So that's sort of where we are in the Third Amendment. It's not a big one. It's not one that people need to think too much about. It's just one of the ones that was there. It was important at the time. It's sort of still important in the sort of whole bucket of personal rights and property rights that individuals are entitled to under the Constitution. So that's what's relevance today. I don't suspect we'll be having a lot of arguments about the Third Amendment. So we'll get on to some of the more challenging ones, the more interesting ones, the Fourth, the Fifth, the 14th. There's a bunch of them out there that are really important, and we'll get to those in the next sessions or two. So thank you very much. I hope this was helpful. Again, like, subscribe, hit the bell, share, send me your comments, and we'll continue to try to bring you some brief educational content, particularly around your rights in the United States. So thank you, and God bless.